One moment that did shock me was in Oklahoma when we legalized medical marijuana. And whatever you think about that, just set that aside for a moment. What happened was, after it's legalized on I-40, our major interstate, these signs start going up, these billboards start going up. And essentially the message of each of these billboards is, are you miserable? Are you depressed? Are you not living your best life? Smoke weed. And I guess just the rawness and the honesty of it was like, okay, if we get to a place in society where we are just openly acknowledging life is unbearable and we're not going to fix it, so get high, clearly that's a sign screaming at us that there's a problem.
Welcome to Acton Line, a product of the Acton Institute for the Study of Religion and Liberty. I'm Gabriel Jaja, producer. You just heard Alan Noble, who is our guest today on the podcast, talking about his new book, You Are Not Your Own, Belonging to God in an Inhumane World. In a conversation with Dan Churchwell, Acton's Director of Program Outreach, Noble presents unique insights on our current cultural moment. He describes a path towards happiness that is actually attainable and provides clear understanding of who we are and where we're going. You can pick up a copy of his book in a link in the show notes of this episode. And our listeners can use a special code, AIPOD22, to get 30% off plus free shipping at ivpress.com. This code is good until February 23rd, 2022. You can find additional resources in the show notes of this episode, as well as previous episodes on our website at acton.org/podcast. If you like this program, you can help us reach even more listeners by sharing it with a friend and leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We welcome your comments as well. Acton Line is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify.
My name is Dan Churchwell, Director of Program Outreach here at the Acton Institute. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Alan Noble, Associate Professor of English at Oklahoma Baptist University. Alan is the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Christ and Pop Culture and an advisor for the AND campaign. He has written for The Atlantic, Vox, BuzzFeed, the Gospel Coalition, Christianity Today, and First Things. He is the author of 2 books, his first book being Disruptive Witness, and then the book we're talking about today is called, and it was just out this fall, You Are Not Your Own. Dr. Noble has his PhD from Baylor University, and Dr. Noble, we're really glad that you're joining us today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So this weekend, you and I have been in contact, for a few weeks getting this set up, and this weekend, though, I was reading an article. I don't know if you know the Hedgehog Review out of UVA.
Yeah.
So
yes.
So their latest stuff went from behind the paywall finally, and I'm reading their articles, and this very latest edition had an article called "How to Be Yourself," and it's in again the latest edition of Hedgehog Review about the college admissions essay requirement, like what kids have to write, to get into college, and it's all about authenticity. And this statement caught my interest in the article. While the college prep advisors are right at asserting that no formula guarantees success, the whole process of presenting your best, most authentic self is highly formulaic. The endless articles of how to write an awesome college essay are remarkably similar in this regard. They reflect a shared set of values about what self to depict and what self to have. Put bluntly, this best, most authentic self is the version best suited to institutional evaluation and approval. And it just made me think of that after finishing your book. And society is just telling, whether it's young people or all of us, to be authentic, to be yourself, to be, I want to be different, just like everybody else, to quote the band Kaylee Rain. So I love your book and its topic. It's provocative, especially for a place like the Acton Institute. So I'm really looking forward to diving in. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. That sounds. I need to read this article now because that sounds like a fascinating. I wonder if you could do a similar thing so that'll tell us how college or students trying to get into college think of the sort of archetype or the Platonic ideal of the authentic self, right?
Sure.
I wonder if you could figure out a similar sort of measurement for more working class or other classes. That would be fascinating.
Yeah, please be as authentic as possible as long as you fit this formula. I mean, there's a certain kind of insanity in the whole gambit. But you open your book in a similar fashion. You say in the introduction, a defining feature of life in the modern West is our awareness of society's inhumanity and our inability to imagine a way out of it. This humanity includes everything from abortions to mass shootings, widespread cover-ups of sexual abuse, to meaningless jobs, broken communities, and TV shows that are only good for numbing our anxiety for 30 minutes. And then later on, you say, strikingly, even as our standard of living in the West continues to rise, our quality of life doesn't. It's possible to make the case that our world is getting better. Dramatic decreases in extreme poverty is one clear example of the world becoming more humane. But yet often the very techniques that improve our material lives are the ones that alienate us from each other and from creation. So, wow, what a thesis. I mean, tell me what was the genesis of this? Was there one defining moment for the book, or how did it develop?
No, yeah, there was no one defining moment. I was thinking through. There were sort of two steps to this. One was thinking about how many of the issues that were the policy issues and social issues and justice issues and ethical issues currently being debated in society centered around this idea of belonging. To whom does the self belong? Do you fundamentally belong to yourself, or do you belong to another? And if you belong to another, who is that other, and what are our obligations to that being? So it seemed to me that a lot of them centered around this. And so you could think about that in relation to, for example, right now with the Supreme Court considering, abortion, right? That there's some clear connections there. So there was sort of this high abstract thought that struck me, that so much of this had to do with our conception of belonging. But then at a sort of existential level, at a personal level, I have been noticing in myself and my family and my friends and my students, just how many of the basic forms of living we have are inhuman, and how often we just take them for granted. And maybe all right, so there was no one clear moment, but one moment that did sort of shock me was in Oklahoma when we legalized medical marijuana. And whatever you think about that, just set that aside for a moment. What happened was, after it's legalized on I-40, our major interstate, these signs start going up, these billboards start going up. And essentially the message of each of these billboards is, are you miserable? Are you depressed? Are you not living your best life? Smoke weed. And I guess just the rawness, the honesty of it
Sure.
was like, okay, if we get to a place in society where we are just openly acknowledging life is unbearable and we're not going to fix it, so get high. Clearly, that's a sign screaming at us that there's a problem.
Sure.
And so then the question was, where is this problem? How does it operate? And at a certain point, I connected those two ideas, this question of belonging and then these, this inhumanity.
Well, as I read the book too, I couldn't help. I mean, what drew my eye to it in the first place was at Acton, we look a lot at what does it mean to be a human person? What does Christian anthropology look like? I mean, it's one of our fundamental principles that guide what we do, and it guides what some of the philosophical thoughts I have personally as well. And so when I read your book, is it fair to say that the central thesis is that the fundamental lie of modernity is that we are our own? That we are naturally sovereign, we are free, limitless in potential and opportunity. Is that kind of what you're driving at? You're trying to react or engage?
Yes. And so and maybe I'm just deluding myself in thinking that I'm not just, rehashing debates about individualism and, but I think what I'm trying to talk about, it includes the sort of American spirit of individualism, but it also goes beyond that to a kind of metaphysical questions of belonging as well, or existentialist questions. To be a person, what does it mean to be a person? And what I'm arguing is that to be a person means to belong to another. And I think the fundamental lie of modernity is that to be a person, we belong only and ever to ourselves.
Yeah, and I think you say that the phenomenon is mapped onto the very structures of our society, and that helps explain our society's underlying disorder. So you're making I think it's fair to say, a rather broad sweeping, you're making a metaphysical claim about the nature of society. That it's almost inescapable, right? No one is not affected by this.
Yeah, it's kind of terrifying to make an argument like that. Sometimes you just have to do it, though. Yeah, see if it sticks.
Yeah, the first half of your book maybe might make somebody want to smoke weed.
It is an interesting problem. Yeah, I've had lots of people say like, there have been several people who told me I really liked the book, and then after they started reading it, and then they stopped talking to me about it, and I'm pretty sure they just got overwhelmed by the first half. So yes.
So let me just ask, just basically, what's ultimately wrong with being wholly responsible for one's own life?
Yeah. So the argument I make in the book is that it's the thing that's wrong with it is that it's impossible. That it's not physically possible. It's not emotionally, spiritually possible. It's not metaphysically possible. Your very existence is a gift. And because of that, if you begin with the assumption that you are the one who holds up your being in the world, your presence in the world, and that includes everything from sort of from justification of your life. My life is meaningful, or it has a sense of fullness, or I looked back on my life and I was satisfied at what I accomplished, whatever it is, to things like identity or values and meaning. If you believe that it's your responsibility to cobble together all of those things to make your life full and rich and meaningful, then you're going to be on this endless treadmill. And what will happen is that, and this what I argue is that society gives us this offer. It says, if you will just accept the responsibilities of self-belonging, that's what I call these things, the responsibilities of self-belonging. If you'll just do this, you'll have the freedom that you desire, and you'll have the peace that you desire. And to help us accomplish these, to meet these responsibilities, it gives us various techniques. But what I argue is that the techniques don't actually ever get us anywhere. So the techniques, for example, the society gives us to craft and define and project and express our identity are never enough. They always leave us feeling deeply inadequate and depressed. And so what do? We use coping mechanisms like weed, which I mentioned earlier. So the fundamental problem is it's not true to existence. And therefore, when we try to live as if it were true, we create inhuman conditions for ourselves and for each other. We create laws and values and expectations and burdens that we put on other people that are not reasonable to put on other people.
Yeah, essentially, if I hear you correctly, you're saying it's this view of humanity is ontologically false. Like the nature of humanity can't be this way.
Yeah. That's correct.
And you use the term society, so I'm going to press you a little bit. When you say society, do you want to spill the tea, as the kids say? What do you mean by society? What are ways or avenues in which these ideas are presented? You talked about billboards on I-40, so that's marketing. Mm-hmm. What are some ways that you see this coming? Society is a pretty broad, nebulous term. Mm-hmm. What ways in society does this come to us?
Yeah. So it certainly comes through mass media. it's a cliche, but it is true that our children are raised to believe that they can be whatever they want to be, and that comes. Here's the thing, that sounds really nice, but it comes with it comes with a moral obligation to be the best you can possibly be, to be whatever you want to be. And if you don't discover your true inner authentic self and pursue that and achieve it, then you're somehow a sense of failure. Or perhaps if you, set aside that thing that you really want to do because your immediate community needs you to serve them, then you're a kind of moral failure because you're not being your true authentic self. So we see this in, whether it's, Disney films or, animated films. And why that example is interesting to me is the quote you gave that I said at the very beginning, which is that we, I don't even remember what I wrote, but, we recognize that the society is deeply inhuman and we can't see a way out of it. And to me, the commentary and the criticisms of Disney films and children's films is a perfect example of that. I've been hearing the same basic criticism, the one I just gave, about how these kids shows are destructive because they're portraying really harmful messages. I've been hearing that for decades. Nothing's changed. And nobody seems, we don't expect it to change. We're just kind of like, well, what are you going to do? Yeah. My kids watch it. Your kids watch, it just continues. It just continues. All right. Yeah. So certainly so I gave the example of kids, but that same basic message will be carried through them as they transfer to social media. So there'll be TikTok influencers or Instagram influencers who are telling them fundamentally the same thing, that their purpose in life, their significance in life is determined by the brand, the being, the identity that they create and project into the world, which is this ridiculous standard that will crush them. So we have it there, but we also have it in academic settings. So you'll have teachers and administrators and parents telling their children that they have to achieve, they have to be the best version of themselves, that if they don't have, the top scores and all these things, and they don't have all these extracurriculars, then they won't get into the right school, and then their life will fall behind, et cetera, et cetera. There are all of these social pressures, social messages from institutions, from individuals, from families, from people who often mean well. I think that's important to note, that your task in life, the one thing that you have to do in life is make your story great. That's your job, is to make your story an amazing story. And if you don't, then your life is a failure.
Yeah. And you, I think in the book, you argue that this comes, or the explanatory power of this comes a lot from Alasdair MacIntyre's concept of emotivism. And how much do you think emotivism, and as he defined it or played with the term and described the term, really does play into, especially for how young people are thought to think about themselves? Do you think that emotivism is foundational?
I would say so. Yes.
Does the social, I've heard you in other settings, other podcasts and things, you talk about the idea of social media. Do you think that has an overabundance, or just it's another part of the whole puzzle that does this?
Yeah. So there's a version of this book that I didn't write, that I'm actually not qualified to write, that focuses much more on the maybe we could say the more material causes. I have focused on one. I would call it sort of an ideological foundation or root. And well, in this case, it's an anthropological root that I think these things come out of. But there is an interesting way of exploring the role that, let's say, social media, the way that markets, the way that technology in general, all feed into this, because I think it's important to know that, this isn't primarily an intellectual thing that's happening. In other words, most people don't wake up and say, I am fundamentally my own and I belong to myself, and it's my job to make my existence meaningful. That's not how it works, sure. Right? And it's not that somebody teaches them this in a very explicit terms. It's just that when you get thousands of similar messages across the day over time, and when we reinforce this, when we reward people for these things, that's what happens.
What I found interesting too is that the Acton Institute, right, named for Lord Acton. Probably his most famous quote is, "Power tends to corrupt, but absolute power corrupts absolutely." But a quote that follows on shortly behind that one is probably his most popular, is that liberty is not the power of doing what we like, but the right of being able to do what we ought.
Oh,
and
that's he should be known for that one. That one's
right.
even better.
Well, and he's writing that as a Catholic to other Catholics and trying to engage the Pope in some certain very technical political engagements that were happening. This was written in 1860, but Pope John Paul II reiterates it in 1995 in Camden Yards in Baltimore. He says, this is Pope John Paul II, "Every generation of Americans need to know that freedom consists not in doing what we like, but in having the right to do what we ought." So it's almost the same quote. So tell me,
are you saying the Pope plagiarized? I'm just trying to clarify. What exactly are you claiming at this moment?
He is a quote. You know, he likes to quote good sources, and so yes, and so he has the opportunity, though, to share that, and you have in your book kind of the same central frame. In other words, you were trying to frame the argument anthropologically, and tell us a little more. I mean, the thesis is this idea that culture, society, what have you, makes us think that we can craft our authenticity. We can make ourself. And then the title of the book is "You Are Not Your Own." So what is the frame that comes from? What is the title? Where did you get that idea?
So I get this from the Heidelberg Catechism, question and answer 1, which asks, what is your only comfort in life and in death? And the answer that it gives is that you are not our own, but belong body and soul, both in life and death, to our faithful Savior, Jesus Christ. And it seemed to me that thinking about so many of these issues, they really do hinge on this question of belonging, and that gets into, or that is absolutely connected to, this idea of liberty. So, for example, if we conceive of liberty as limitlessness, that makes a whole lot of sense if we are our own and belong to ourselves, because there is no limit except what the natural world and our willpower and society puts upon us, right? And the thing is those three forces are the natural world, our will, and society. Those are things that the contemporary world is actively working on, right? So we're working on bending our nature so that we can be whatever we want to be. We're working on changing our wills, right? There are so many strategies and techniques and mindset programs that you can get into to have the right attitude to change things, and also society. We're constantly trying to change society to make it this space where people can pursue their authentic self, but even though it's always not really an original authentic self. So this question of liberty, this very Enlightenment idea of liberty as limitlessness, is contrasted with the classical understanding of liberty as well, what Lord Acton and the Pope after him, and many others have pointed to, which is that true freedom lies in the ability to do what is good.
And it seemed like you were at tension with, I mean, that's the idea. If we are to create our authentic self, there's a sense in which, again, this is implicit, not explicit, but that we are untethered from any mooring or moral grounding. I mean, that's the concern, right? That if we are all supposed to be autonomous, limitless selves, that there really is no foundation to have any kind of and so you were trying to focus us or reorient the reader back to this foundation. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. So I would say now it can be a little bit tricky, but I would say in general, that's right. So it really depends on our verbiage. So if you believe that we are fundamentally our own, will you have sort of any grounds to guide you? Well, yes, there are going to be social norms that pressure you, and the existentialists, mid-century French existentialists talk about this quite a bit. As part of our challenge is is sort of backing up and getting out of these social norms so that we can really be free. So it's possible, for example, to be someone who's very Christian and supports very conservative ideas that restrain liberty in certain ways, but still view yourself as being fundamentally your own person. And it just so happens that you've chosen this lifestyle as opposed to a more libertine lifestyle, right? And I think that happens. I have seen this with students and other Christians I know, people who view their faith and the rules that come along with it as a lifestyle option. And I want to say, if you're taking that perspective, I'm not saying you're not a Christian, but I am saying that it could be the case that you're building from a fundamentally flawed basis, which is still that you are radically autonomous.
Yeah. And you use multiple societal illustrations in your writing, and you rely heavily and quote heavily from Jacques Ellul and others, Wendell Berry, etc. Jacques Ellul, he had this idea of technique in modern society, and technique, again, it was a much broader idea for Ellul, but efficiency comes out in multiple places in your book, and you seem to take aim, especially at efficiency. The idea of if it can't be counted, it doesn't count, and that element of modern society. Why do you think that's especially pernicious?
So the danger that Ellul points to is that technique, which has to do with efficiency, methods for maximizing efficiency in every human endeavor. If efficiency becomes a problem when it becomes the primary standard, the primary value that we have. And Ellul's argument, I'm not quite where he is, but Ellul's argument is that really efficiency in the form of technique will just override all values, all religious values, all government values, and it'll overcome everything. I'm not quite that strong on it, but I do think that it is very tempting for efficiency to become the thing that predominates. And there are a number of reasons for that. One is that when you mentioned emotivism. Okay, so when it comes to morality, when we're operating from an emotivist perspective and we can't really agree very well on ethical principles, that's difficult to operate on as a society. But I'll tell you, if I can put a number on the harm caused by a certain policy, all of a sudden it's a whole lot easier for us to have a public debate about it. Right. So if I can say this policy will reduce harm this much, that makes it a lot easier. Or this practice in the office will increase productivity and sales this much. Then that's a whole lot more tangible than saying something like having this practice with the way we engage with customers is more humanizing or more loving or more honoring or has more dignity. Those sorts of values are, because they're not really quantifiable, they tend to fall by the wayside, and because we tend not to agree on them. Right. There's a whole lot of, in doing the research for this book, one of the things that I was struck by was that I think it was Steven Pinker, but it might've been somebody else, is very suspicious of the word dignity, because it's like, it could mean anything and nothing. So, we can't really measure that, but what we can do is look at these measurements of poverty reduction or something like that. So that's, in my mind, I mean, that I think is one of the great pulls of efficiency.
Absolutely. And if it looks better on graphs for sure, right? And you can track. In free market economics, one of the main graphs people use is what's called the hockey stick of post 1800. If you look at economic productivity pre 1800, it's pretty flat. And then roughly at 1800, it just precipitously rises, right? And you even mentioned, I quoted in the beginning of your book, like that people can point to even in the last decade. I mean, hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people have been brought out of poverty. And so there is an element of good, right? But so what is you engage the idea of markets and efficiency in a way that seems like I guess what I'm trying to understand is your concern is to make sure that we don't make them ultimate. Is that right? That we don't look merely to efficiency or merely to economic progress as the sole arbiter of, for the lack of a better term, flourishing. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. Yeah. So when markets are exclusively focused on efficiency, or and not just markets, but really any institutions, when efficiency becomes the highest standards, then inevitably humans are going to be treated in inhuman ways. So here's an interesting example. A couple of maybe 2 months ago now, Harvard Business Review published this article on things, I think it was benefits that employees most desired, not like medical benefits, but perks around the office. And the number one thing was natural lighting. That's what employees wanted most. And when I read that, I thought, that's kind of depressing. I mean, on the one hand, it's not, because if you've been in an office with no windows, you know how depressing, depressing that could be.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the fact that you would even need a study to say that people like sunlight is it's just remarkable. But what killed me was after that paragraph, after it establishes, okay, this percentage said this is what they want, so natural lighting. The article goes on to say something, in essence, employers should offer their employees this benefit because employees that work in natural light are this percentage more productive. And I thought, well, that's it, isn't it? Right? So because there's an interesting question here. What if that wasn't true? What if I do a study tomorrow and it turns out they're no more productive? What if it's not more efficient? Maybe it's just good to offer your employees something that's good for them as human beings. Now, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing that they're more productive. No, that's great. That's great. What I'm saying is, and this is not just markets, but it's anything, when our frame of mind is we have to justify everything through efficiency, inevitably other values, morality, the good of our neighbor, will fall by the wayside. And I feel like that's the world that we're living in.
Yeah. And when you talk about, I was thinking about what other organizations or institutions are affected by this, and obviously the workplace is high. This shows up highly in the workplace. How do you think your idea? How would this help humanize? I've been thinking a lot recently about humanizing the workplace, trying to pull it out of this technocracy or whatever we would like to call it. There's so many articles on the Great Resignation. I think you quote or engage the idea of burnout in your book as well, and this idea of rest. I really loved the idea of rest or burnout, ultimately it's human. The idea of being flourishing humans is what is your major concern and where it's grounded. But talk about burnout a little bit, or this low-grade anxiety that seems to just be hovering over the workplace. I mean, what do you think can be done there with this idea of rest or just
in the workplace?
Yeah, workplace
specifically.
Issues. Sure.
Yeah. So, and this is related to technique as well. If there is always another technique to improve your life, right? And Lowell, I think the phrase he uses in the English translation, every sphere of human life or something like this, right? And that is that really is the case. I think I used this example in the book, but when I was writing it, I love to sleep on my side. I'm a side sleeper, but my shoulder, as I'm getting older, what happens, like your body starts hurting, doing simple things like sleeping. I sleep on my side and I wake up with all this pain in my shoulder. This is what being old is like. And what did I do? I Googled it. And I knew, even before I Googled it, I knew there would be a best practice for sleeping on my side. And there was. It was prophetic. I knew, and there somebody had done some study and they told you exactly how to sleep on your side. Well, that's a trivial thing, not to my shoulder, but in the big scheme of things, But there's those kinds of best practices, better methods, better techniques for everything, for sending emails, for dealing with text messages, for responding to problems in the workplace, to managing time cards, to whatever. There's always a better technique. And if there is, and you're not adopting it, there's that sort of moral pressure. You're falling behind, you're not doing enough. And so you're always aware in the back of your mind that you're inadequate.
Yeah.
You're not doing the right way. You're not, this seems like a wonderful podcast. There are best practices that I'm sure you're not following, right?
Oh,
and
sure.
if you let yourself, you can be, there can be this low grade anxiety. Every time you do one of these, you'll be like, man, I know we should have this equipment, or I know we should be doing this, or I know I should be prepping in this way, and that can go on for eternity. And it's projected in front of us too. It's not just like there's knowledge way out there that I would have to hunt for. This stuff is being thrown in our faces through, advertising and such. And so I think this, among other things, creates this sense of just constant inadequacy, constantly behind, never able to catch up. So the question of, how do we, humanize the workplace? We have to, on the one hand, recognize that efficiency is not a bad thing in the abstract. It has good and proper uses. And we don't want people to be inefficient for the sake of being inefficient. That's just foolishness. So humanizing the workspace does not mean trying to be as inefficient as possible, but instead it means looking at the way we do things and not valuing efficiency as the maximum good. It also means, Ellul, in an article he wrote later, argues that we must learn to choose not to do all that we can do. And I think this is an interesting thing. So I'm going to give an example. I'm just going to give an example from churches, because this is kind of what I know. Many churches, and this will be true with businesses as well, feel like they have to adopt the latest technology over the pandemic as the services became streaming. Right. Everyone had to stream. There was a lot of pressure to get the best technology, and so these little churches that were not used to this all of a sudden felt like, I've got to have these programs, I've got to have this equipment, I have to have this production because the technology is there. And what Ellul would say is that we need to choose not to do all that we can do. Yes, there are fancier ways of doing things, but that doesn't mean that we always need to do them. So that's one thought. The other thought is that even when we do make decisions for the well-being of our employees, it's okay if it actually does lead to an increased bottom line and more productivity. But I think we need to have in our minds the decision that if a policy is good for my employees or my customers as human beings, that's enough of a reason. If I can, unless it bankrupts the company or something, but that's enough of a reason. I don't need to have the numbers to back it up.
Yeah, and for the modern workplace, or even just the modern organization, whether it's nonprofit or church or business, it seems like the constant race to have the most efficient or the best equipment masks what it means to interact humanely. I mean, if you've ever managed people, the more you have in between you, like programmatically, and just the human touch, the engagement with the human person, because you're right, somebody might be underperforming, but if you just use the raw data for the underperformance and don't look into the situation deeper or ask questions or engage on a level that, again, is more humane, you miss the larger picture. More of the context is simply missing.
Yep.
And I don't know if you are familiar with Hartmut Rosa. He's a German sociologist. His little book, The Uncontrollability of the World.
Fantastic.
Oh, have you? Okay, so he argues that this low grade anxiety we're trying to trying to make the world more visible, more reachable, more manageable, and more useful. This four, and if we can't make it more visible, reachable, manageable, and useful, it's the anxiety is there because we can never really fully get there. And we try to control every little piece. And like you said, but then next week, whether it's Harvard Business Review or Forbes or whoever, has a new technique. Right. And we just can't get there. So in this book, that's like the first half, you're trying to talk about, efficiencies and some of these institutions that this topic infects or, engages us to think this way. Is there hope? I mean, you lay out a pretty broad, condemnation, if you will. What do you see as the opportunity to say, how do we flourish? Where is the common good using this frame?
So there a couple things give me hope. So the most practical thing that gives me hope is that it does seem to me, talking to younger people, my students in particular, and I've heard this from many other people at colleges, that there is a general dissatisfaction and maybe the Great Resignation. Is that what we're calling it?
Yep,
yeah.
Yep.
That I've wanted to write. This is one of the things I've wanted to write a piece on, but I haven't been able to this semester. I wonder if part of that, if what we're seeing there is connected to some of the themes in this book. This sense that when you're working a meaningless job, that there's no sense of dignity in it, and it's dehumanizing. Then, and when prices are going up and wages are not, then you're kind of like, well, what's the point of any of this, right? Which seems like at least a rational response. So, I am seeing, I think, in my students a wide. It is not difficult for me to persuade them that they are overwhelmed and burnt out already, and that it comes from this sense of self-belonging. They're there. They know this. They know the role social media plays in it. They just don't know an alternative. So that's encouraging, right? Because if you cannot identify the disease, you can't even begin to diagnose it. And so often what we do is we just throw up our hands, and instead we put up billboard signs offering, medical marijuana, and say, well, we can just numb ourselves. That's the best we can do right now. So that's a sign of hope. Ultimately, I turn to Elul's theological writings and T.S. Eliot's theological writings in his poetry for my sense of hope. Both of them writing roughly mid-century in Europe, both wrestling with what we generally call a post-Christian Europe, and the question of where is civilization going. And for both of them, there is the requirement to act where you are in your sphere of influence, to bear witness to God, to pursue justice, to live righteously where you are and wherever your sphere of influence might be. But there's also this recognition that that ultimate redemption comes through Christ, and that there is a danger in efforts to too programmatically or systematically or too confidently come up with plans to save the country, save the West, save civilization, and these sorts of things. And that comes with a sense of peace. Eliot calls it waiting without hope. And Elul points out that, if this seems dissatisfying, this whole idea that our task is to honor God where we are instead of trying to save the entire city ourselves, if that sounds unsatisfying, we have to remember that God is the God who saved all of Nineveh. So there's that. And my hope would be, as a practical implication, that, from a book like this, and this is just one among many books that are having this conversation that are out right now, that people would start being conscious, and that we could have pockets of resistance in churches, in institutions, in schools that are pushing back, that are saying we don't have to live like this. Are they going to radically change society? I'm skeptical, but it doesn't matter. I guess that's my point, is it doesn't matter. If it's the right thing to do, then we should do it. And that I think is the case.
Yeah. And you're a professor. You've worked with students for years. I had the chance to teach for over a decade in 2 different higher ed institutions, and both were Christian. And what I found is this idea of to change the world, or this idea, particularly for Christian students, well-meaning, but it was an anxiety that was laid on their doorstep that just doesn't have to be. This concept of change the world, like you are world changers, this kind of rah-rah freshman seminar kind of thing. And it just really seems to be largely damaging. What could we do as leaders? How about that? Is there a way to think through this in our families or our smaller spheres of influence, like you said, where we can kind of be subversive?
So what's interesting about this to me is an example of how this idea that we are our own and belong to ourselves, and therefore we have these responsibilities of self-belonging. So we have to make our lives significant and meaningful by changing the world, et cetera, et cetera. This is one example of how I think it's just as true in religious communities as in secular communities, because secular kids are being taught the same thing in public schools, and religious kids are taught this in public schools as well, right? That they are going to change the world, that they're going to save the world, and part of the implication is that they have the responsibility to do all these things, and that they are capable of doing all these things if they just put their mind to it and work, because they've been given the techniques that they need to be highly successful and achieve their dreams. So if they don't, it's their fault. And that is crushing. Yeah. So, I think, so this is a good question. So, on the practical side, we need to be able to, help younger people understand the great dignity in simple faithfulness. So, I think it's of great value to ask young people as they're considering college majors or careers or whatever, not just what are you good at and what can you make money at and what do you enjoy doing, which are 3 fine questions, but what is your society, what does your community need? What is for the common good? And that's the question that I think I was never encouraged to think through that question. Not what will change the world, right? Because sometimes we're telling them that, and that's too much, but just what does your community need? Right. Because I fear that sometimes students feel that they have to become doctors or lawyers or missionaries or something, and leave their community in order to do something meaningful. But what their communities need is someone to be faithful where they are and do simple, honest, faithful work. Blue collar, white collar, it doesn't matter. And so there's really a whole conception of what the good life looks like, what the faithful life looks like, that we need to be embodying and that we need to be promoting as a counter narrative. And that certainly happens in higher education. And I think that we have a big role to play in that. And I often talk to my students about the fact that, some of them when they're seniors feel this pressure to go to grad school. And there's, this unspoken feeling that if they don't get a higher degree, because so many people have bachelors, then maybe they're not good enough. And so being able to talk to them about, if you have a job that supports your family, that does honorable work, that is blessing your community in some way, and you do that job faithfully for the rest of your life, that's a good life.
Yeah.
And I don't think they've been taught that.
Yeah, and it seems so simple. In another context, it's what Eugene Peterson calls like the long obedience in the same a long obedience in the same direction. And it's kind of a flattening or an evening. And people, you can see it in their eyes. You can see them come alive, or when they can engage that's actually an option.
Mm-hmm.
It really does take some reformatting for some people, and especially you're in a unique position with college-age students to really work through some of those tensions. I want to leave today as we wrap up a little bit on rest. And I've heard you talk in different contexts about the importance of rest. And can you explain why you find that needful in our contemporary era?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, if we have a burnout crisis, then clearly we need to rest. So that's one component of it. But it's interesting because it's possible to have a kind of fake rest that is merely recharging, so that we can be more productive later. And the kind of rest that I'm talking about is not that. So really, we both talked, you mentioned ontologically, and I mentioned metaphysically, that, sort of the themes that I'm trying to express here, they are existential, they are biological rest, but they also have to do with our place in existence. And I guess I would want to say that if ontologically we are fundamentally our own, then we probably shouldn't ever rest. That we can recharge so that we can be more effective when we wake up, but we should never rest. We have to be constantly vigilant, constantly working, constantly improving, becoming the best version of ourselves. That's the obligation. That's the duty that we have until we drop dead. And I do think that is how most of us feel, whether we want to believe that or not. That's often how we operate. The alternative is that our existence in the world, and actually existence itself, is preserved by someone to whom we belong, and is not us, in this case, God. And if that possibility is true, then we can rest, that we have the ontological freedom to not be productive all the time, to not be doing something advantageous. And it's really hard in our society to do that. So, for example, yesterday was Sunday. I could imagine I could sit down with my children and read them a book. And in my mind, I could be thinking, aha, Alan, you're being a great dad. This is going to increase their vocabulary by 5 points. And studies have shown that children whose fathers read to them are much more likely to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And all of a sudden, it's efficiency. All of a sudden, I'm not actually leisurely. I'm not actually in rest and in peace. Just doing something beautiful and good. Instead, I'm programming my children to be better, more effective and productive members of society. So I think if we do not belong to ourselves, then we have the freedom to rest. And that's not an easy thing. It's hard for us to do. I often feel guilty seriously resting. I'm fine exhausting myself until I collapse, but I find it very difficult to stop and delight in something that is unproductive, that's not going to give me some advantage or get me ahead or catch up on something. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is a symptom of a larger problem that we, Ellul, frames it as this, this idea that we can exist without the hand of God, that we support ourselves. So the rest I'm talking about, the rest we need, is the antidote to burnout, but it's also the antidote to the tyranny of efficiency that can squash all other values in human goods and spiritual goods. But it's also very hard to do. And so practically, that's something that we can do together, is we can practice this, encourage each other to practice this in community.
And you mentioned something even as simple, there's so much loneliness and anxiety that just the ability to drop by, I've heard, you had friends that you could just drop by their house, or just, no matter, the house wasn't spick and span, the food was, whatever you could figure out, and have a meal together. But there was an idea that rest wasn't necessarily being alone, but not having to strive for perfection.
That's right.
Even in friendships.
Yeah. What's Rosa? Harmont Rosa?
Hartmut. Yeah, Hartmut.
Hartmut Rosa. Yeah. So I read his book, The Uncontrollability of the World, after I finished drafting and sending off revisions. And I read it and I was like, this is great. And there's these perfect overlaps, different language, different approach, but it's fundamentally these same questions about control and about power and about autonomy. Anyway, but yeah, it's that, a restful, hospitality is one where you're not trying to master your house and control the environment and the party and the experience, but you're just you're just with them.
Yeah, and it reminded me of G.K. Chesterton. I don't know if you're familiar. He has this great little triad. He thought we were getting leisure fundamentally wrong, the idea of leisure. He argues that there's really 3 different types of leisure when we talk about leisure. The first is being allowed simply to do something. But the second kind of leisure is being allowed to do anything. But then he said, ultimately, thirdly, this is real leisure, the ability or to be allowed to do nothing, to be freed up to just simply do nothing, to have the ability to let your mind go and rest and interact with what you will, rather than, a lot of culture, you can either play golf or play tennis. That's what we think of leisure, but there are limits that we can do either something or anything. But he argued that true leisure is really if you have the ability to do absolutely nothing. And I find that
that's interesting.
This idea of idleness, true idleness, letting the mind. And of course, he was a guy who wrote 100 books and thousands of art, like 3,000, I think, newspaper. So he wasn't an idle man himself, but he treasured that he saw even in his own society, British society, that we don't have the ability to just do nothing.
Yeah.
Because the true leisure, we just can't even attain it. And so I really do think we need to get back. And I like how you presented the idea of hospitality. That's a very simple way that many people should be able to think about their life in a way that could be easily more restful. Well, Alan, what's next for you? What are you thinking about? Speaking of efficiency and anxiety, are you thinking about a new project, or is there something? What's keeping you motivated?
Yeah, so I've got another book tentatively called "On Getting Out of Bed" that deals with questions of mental health. I wrote an essay called "On Living" that I'm basically expanding into a short book. So I drafted that over the summer. I'm just going to edit that over the break. And so I'm going to work on that, and that'll be fun. I mean, I don't mean that sarcastically. I mean, it actually will be satisfying.
Well, I really appreciate your time today talking about your book, You Are Not Your Own. I did talk with your rep at IVP, and they're willing for our listeners when this is sent out that if listeners find this book interesting, find this topic provocative, I do recommend the book that listeners can get 30% plus free shipping, 30% off and free shipping through ivppress.com. And so if they use the code AIPOD22, and we'll put that in the show notes so they can see that. But we'd love to get more people reading and discussing your work. So thanks for being with us. Good luck on this new writing project, and we appreciate your work.
Thank you.
As always, thank you for listening. Our team loves putting this podcast together for you. It's encouraging to hear from our listeners. Feedback is incredibly important to us because it lets us know what you'd like to hear more of, including the kinds of topics you're interested in most. If you have comments, feedback, or ideas for a show topic or interesting guest, you can email our team at producer@acton.org. Until next week, for Acton Line, I'm Gabriel Jaja.